What if the Great Chicago Fire wasn't an accident, but a cover-up?
Shadow Archive.
October 10, 1871. The morning after. The smoke had not yet lifted from Chicago's skyline. What remained of the city was a jagged silhouette of scorched beams, cracked chimneys, and twisted iron. The Great Fire had devoured everything in its path, leaving 17,000 buildings in ruin and over 100,000 people homeless. The scent of ash and soaked timber clung to the air like a bitter fog. But in the wreckage, something strange had survived. At the edge of what used to be Dearborn Street, near the blackened foundation of the Middleton estate, a group of boys scavenging for copper stumbled upon a battered tin lockbox. It was still warm to the touch, its latch warped from heat. Inside, 3 letters, brittle with singed edges but legible. They bore no postage, no names, only dates and the initials, EM, in fine script. The letters found their way to Edgar Hale, a reporter for the Chicago Tribune, whose office had also perished in the inferno. Hale was no stranger to lost causes. He had spent most of his career chronicling minor city scandals and false rumors, but something about the letters stirred him. Not just because they survived the blaze, but because of what they suggested: a vanished woman, a false identity, and the fire not as accident, but as cover. The first letter was dated August 3, 1871. If anyone finds this, understand that what is coming is no mistake of nature. The wind will be blamed, as will the cows and the barns. But no fire starts itself. No fire waits for the clock to strike 10. I have seen the papers exchanged. I have seen the floor plans. Hale reread it a dozen times. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and undeniably from someone educated and scared. The second letter was stranger still. Elias promised the evidence would be delivered by the end of September. But there's been a change. He says the buyer demands it sooner. I told him the girl would not give it up willingly. He said she will not need to. The girl, the estate this had been found near, the Middleton home, had belonged to Eleanor Middleton, heiress to a lumber fortune and known for her sudden withdrawal from society that spring. Rumors had swirled. A failed engagement, a family dispute, even madness. But no one had confirmed her whereabouts in months. Now, with the estate reduced to embers and her name missing from casualty lists, Hale's instincts bristled. Eleanor Middleton had not died in the fire. She had disappeared before it. The final letter was the most cryptic. The hollow column in the drawing room. If they find it, everything unravels. The rest is already buried. Leave tonight. That same afternoon, Hale traveled to the ruins of the Middleton estate. The ground was still warm underfoot, puddled with rain from fire hoses. The brick perimeter was mostly intact, save for one corner where a wide parlor once stood. He found what might have been the drawing room by tracing charred furniture stumps and scorched wallpaper. Then he saw it. A half-toppled marble column, not structural, cracked open from the heat. Inside was a hollow cavity no wider than a man's hand. It was empty. Someone had come before him. Hale's search for Eleanor Middleton had begun. Hale spent the night cross-referencing names, cross streets, and memories of the city now gone. Every journalist, constable, and undertaker he still knew post-fire was paid a visit. Most had seen nothing, remembered little, or had stories that clashed. But one thing was clear. Eleanor Middleton's name had vanished from the city's daily pulse long before the fire. He found an old obituary clerk, Morris Neely, working from a wine cellar turned morgue. The man remembered Eleanor's name from a wedding announcement that had never been printed. She was to be married to a shipping magnate's son, Nathaniel Greaves, in April. Never happened, Neely muttered. He withdrew. No notice. Whole thing hushed. But there was something else. A rumor that Eleanor had spent her last weeks at the Lakeshore Sanatorium, a private asylum for the city's elite. The sanatorium was untouched by the fire, located far north, beyond the fire's deadly crescent. Hale visited 2 days later under a false name, pretending to inquire about a cousin. The place reeked of lavender and something metallic beneath it. The matron, stern and sharp-eyed, nearly turned him away until he slipped her a silver dollar. Eleanor Middleton was here, she admitted quietly. But only for 6 days. Her father placed her under rest after a nervous condition. She left in June. No forwarding address. Left or was taken? Hale asked. The matron said nothing. He returned to the city, frustrated but energized. 6 days. Long enough to silence someone. Long enough to fake a recovery. Long enough to disappear. Then came a break. Among the ruins of a mail depot near the river, workers uncovered a batch of half-burned private correspondences, dated early October. One bore Eleanor's handwriting, unmistakable now that Hale had studied the earlier letters. It was addressed to a man named Elias Finch, an attorney, long disbarred. The letter. I have copied the documents you showed me. The pages with Greaves' signature and the land deeds he claims were inherited. He lied. He forged them. You were right. I hid the originals in the house, but someone else knows. I hear them at night. The noise in the hall. The clock stalling at the same time. I won't be here long. Elias Finch. Hale found no address under his name, but old court records listed a former office in a narrow alley behind the old courthouse. The building was still standing, stone-faced and grim. He went there on a gray afternoon. Inside, dust blanketed every surface. But behind a false panel in the back of the fireplace, Hale found what he had hoped for. A ledger, blackened at the corners but intact. The entries were coded. Initials, sums, dates, but a pattern emerged. Greaves' name was not there, but Hale recognized aliases tied to his shipping interests. There were payments, and each coincided with significant land transfers in Chicago's rapidly expanding West End. Land that, in theory, belonged to the Middleton estate. Hale realized the scheme. Eleanor had discovered fraud on a grand scale. Greaves and possibly others had planned to burn the evidence, literally. The fire had been more than a disaster. It had been a purge. He returned to the Middleton ruins again, this time with gloves and lantern in hand. He dug near the hollow column, this time deeper. Beneath layers of ash and flooring, he struck something hard. A metal strongbox, scorched but sealed. Inside were papers. Deeds, letters, a marriage contract unsigned, and something else, a photograph of Eleanor. She stood by the lakeshore, hair pinned tightly, one hand holding a book, the other shielding her eyes. On the back, a date, June 16, 1871. The day she had left the sanatorium. She had run. And someone had followed her. Eleanor Middleton had not perished in the fire. She had vanished into the smoke long before it began. Hale returned to the Tribune's temporary quarters, a drafty printing house now doubling as the city's voice, and laid out the evidence. The forged deeds, the silent marriage collapse, the coded ledger, and the surviving letters painted a damning picture. Nathaniel Greaves had orchestrated a scheme to siphon land titles through false inheritance, but Eleanor had found the proof and likely intended to expose it. The fire, timed perfectly, destroyed not just buildings, but the paper trail. He published nothing yet, too soon, and the story might vanish under pressure or vanish altogether, just like Eleanor. Instead, he tracked Greaves. Greaves had relocated to a temporary office on Michigan Avenue, untouched by fire. Hale posed as a clerk delivering recovered Middleton documents. Greaves, older than the society portraits suggested, accepted the envelope without expression. But Hale noticed something strange. The man's hand trembled. Not from age, he was no older than 40, but from recognition. Fear. The next morning, Greaves fled the city. Hale followed. By sundown, he was on a train to Milwaukee. A day later, Greaves changed trains again, heading northwest. Hale, 2 compartments back, watched him through smudged windows. He noted the man's agitation, the hushed conversations with porters, the anxious glances over his shoulder. The train reached Duluth. Greaves vanished. But in the depot's ledger, Hale found a name scrawled on the arrival's manifest, Elias Finch. Not Greaves, but a name Hale knew well. An alias, perhaps, or a meeting. Hale spent 3 days combing boarding houses, saloons, and rail offices. Then, at a telegraph station, he caught a whisper of something strange. A woman, elegant, reserved, who had taken residence at the edge of the harbor weeks before the fire. She paid in coin, walked alone, and used no name. Her neighbors called her the bookwoman, always seen writing by the water, always watching the shoreline. It was Eleanor. He found the cottage easily. Small, cedar-framed, half sunk into the earth, it faced the cold lake like a sentinel. The windows were shuttered. A chimney curled smoke into the overcast sky. He knocked. No answer. He waited. Then, from the trees behind him, came the click of a revolver. Turn slowly. The voice was calm, female, and unmistakably educated. Hale turned. Eleanor Middleton stood 10 feet away, her dark coat buttoned to the throat, a revolver steady in her grip. She was thinner than in the photograph, paler too, but her eyes were sharper than Hale imagined. There was no madness there, only clarity. "I'm not here to harm you," Hale said. "Then why are you here?" "I found the letters. I know what they tried to do." She lowered the revolver slightly. "You're too late," she said. "It's already begun." Hale stepped forward. "Begun?" "They'll burn more," she said. "The Middleton lands were only the start. Do you know what happens when a city burns? Ownership resets. Deeds vanish. Boundaries blur. Paper is easy to lose." She turned, walked toward the cottage. "You'd better come inside." Inside, she showed him everything. Duplicates of the documents, a map marked with properties already seized, and a diary detailing the entire fraud. Her father had known. He'd helped orchestrate it, but Eleanor, discovering it too late, had threatened to expose the plan. They'd committed her, silenced her, and planned the fire to remove her voice entirely. She had run, but not to hide. To wait. For what? Hale asked. For someone to see the smoke and ask why it rose the way it did. She handed him the diary. "I can't publish it," he said quietly. "Not yet. They'll silence it, discredit you, or worse." "Then don't publish it," she said. "Not until the next fire." Hale didn't understand. But a week later, a warehouse district in Milwaukee caught fire. Dozens dead, land lost. Greaves had been seen nearby. It wasn't over. It had only begun. The fire in Milwaukee was no accident. Hale, reading the reports, saw the same pattern. A blunted investigation, hurried insurance claims, and new owners appearing with conveniently found deeds. Names tied to Greaves' network began emerging again: silent investors, obscure companies, shell names hidden behind clerks and law firms. Eleanor had been right. Hale returned to Chicago, the city still bleeding from its wounds, and made arrangements. He buried the diary in a safe deposit box under a false name, made copies of the Middleton documents, and sent them to trusted allies in 3 other cities: journalists, editors, men and women with no love for fraud. He didn't publish, not yet, but he made sure the truth could not be burned again. Then he vanished from the Tribune. Under the name Edward Harlan, he traveled west, following trails of vanished ownership and sudden fires. In St. Louis, a granary burned and left behind a trail of forged receipts. In Kansas City, an old bank deed re-emerged with a Middleton watermark, proof of theft. Hale knew now, the fire wasn't a method. It was a strategy, a business. He called it TheAshLine. Each city it touched lost part of its memory, its maps, its owners, its truth. And each time, new names bought up the land before the rubble cooled. Names tied, always, back to Greaves and his faceless financiers. One night, in Denver, Hale received a letter. No return address, no signature. The hollow column was only the first. The next will be the clock tower. You'll know it by the silence before the flames. E.M. He arrived in Baltimore a week later. There, he found her again. Eleanor was living under the name Anna Moreland, librarian of a small maritime college. Her appearance was different: dyed hair, rural clothes, but her eyes were unchanged. Sharp, unforgiving. Together, they watched a city built on dry timber and quiet corruption. And then the tower burned. The city blamed lightning. The fire brigade arrived late. The courthouse collapsed inward, taking decades of records with it. And by morning, a new construction firm, Midwest Holdings, had already petitioned to rebuild. Hale and Eleanor stood together at dawn, watching the smoke curl over the rooftops. "Now," she said, "we publish." The story ran in 5 cities. The fire cartel of the Midwest. It named names. It traced deeds. It exposed connections that no mayor could explain. The public outrage was immediate. Trials were scheduled. Greaves disappeared again, but not before denying everything. But Eleanor had anticipated this. A final envelope was delivered to Hale one evening, days after she vanished once more. Inside was a single document, a confession. Her father's handwriting, dated weeks before the first fire. A full accounting of the fraud, regret, fear, and at the end, a plea. "May the fire purify what I could not." The confession broke the last defense. The TheAshLine ended. But Eleanor Middleton was never seen again. Some say she fled to Europe. Others believe she died in the mountains, far from courts and columns. But Hale kept the photograph, her by the lakeshore, and in his final column, years later, he wrote, "She saw the fire coming. She stepped into it, not to burn, but to carry the truth through it." 3 years passed. The ash line had unraveled, but not entirely. Though the core scheme had been exposed, imitators cropped up, less refined, less widespread, but dangerous all the same. Cities still burned under suspicious circumstances, and Hale, now working independently, began building something Eleanor had only hinted at, a secret ledger of fires, frauds, and false names. He called it the Ember Book. It was a silent project. Hidden, never published. For every fire marked as accident, Hale traced ownership transitions, false claims, and changes in political favor. A pattern emerged, not as tightly controlled as Greaves's empire, but inspired by it. And then came a letter, postmarked from Marseille. "Eleanor, or someone pretending. I am safe, but not free. You were right not to stop. The fire never needed fuel, it needed fear. They've taken that lesson elsewhere now. East, watch reports." He cross-referenced maritime shipping logs and discovered a company, Canal Futures Limited, quietly acquiring burned properties near major harbors, Boston, Charleston, Norfolk. The same pattern, the same silence before the flames. Eleanor was hunting again. Hale packed and left Chicago for the last time. In Boston, Hale walked the wharves by night, studying the piers and warehouses. His instincts were right. Shipping manifests had been altered, warehouses emptied before fires, and payments sent through the same ghost company tied to Greaves's inner circle. He left messages in the open. A mark on a lamppost Eleanor would recognize. A book in a public library, page folded twice. He knew she'd find them if she was still watching. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, a page slipped under his hotel door. North End, Bell Tower, midnight. He went alone. The bell tower was derelict, bricks crumbling, windows boarded. But at the top, in the stillness of night, he found her. Older, quieter, but alive. "You've kept the fire burning," she said. "And you've kept the world from burning with it," he replied. She handed him a small book, worn leather, filled with maps, names, and patterns Hale hadn't seen. "A second Ember Book. They've shifted," she said. "Fires aren't just destruction now. They're misdirection. While cities burn, others are quietly bought." They? Not just Greaves. He was a tool. "There are more. You publish what you can. I'll gather the rest." Before he could ask more, she descended the stairs and disappeared into the smoke of the waking city. Years later, Edgar Hale died in a quiet home by Lake Michigan. He had no children, no wife, but his will named a single heir, A. Moreland. No one could trace the name. Among his effects was a sealed trunk, labeled simply, "TheAshLine," unfinished. Inside, dozens of letters, maps, clippings, and 2 Ember Books. The trunk was donated, years later, to a historical society. For decades it remained unopened, misfiled, ignored. Until 1933, during a restoration of the Society's archives, a researcher uncovered it. She was cataloging city fire histories. She read Hale's notes, the Ember Books, the diagrams of real estate fraud, the timelines that matched mysterious urban fires from the Great Chicago Fire to Baltimore's 1904 disaster. And in one envelope, pressed flat, a photograph. A woman standing at a lakeshore, hands shielding her eyes. No name on the back. Only 2 letters. E.M. 1942 Washington, D.C. A file labeled, Harlan Archive, lands on the desk of a mid-level intelligence analyst in the Office of Strategic Services. His name is Walter Renshaw, a bookish man more comfortable with paper trails than fieldwork. He's been assigned a backlog of miscellaneous urban files for reclassification. One name keeps resurfacing in odd places, Eleanor Middleton. First, in a coded 1870s ledger linked to suspected financial sabotage in New York. Then again in a 1901 insurance fraud case in Philadelphia, under the alias E.M. Hawthorne. Then in a silent note from 1914, warning of a fire at a port warehouse in Marseille, days before it burned. Each reference is buried, none conclusive, but the pattern is unmistakable. Renshaw follows the thread to the National Archives private storage, box 717F. Inside, he finds the Ember Books. He's stunned. Dozens of fires, decades apart, across 5 continents. all marked with the same pattern of ownership transfers, forged documentation, and false flags. Eleanor had not disappeared. She had gone underground. She had been tracking the TheAshLine across oceans. Renshaw sends a memo. Most of his supervisors ignore it. But one man replies. You're not the first to notice her. But you might be the last. Watch the trains. RC. Renshaw traces the initials. RC matches a former postal inspector, Roland Claiborne, who had worked fraud cases tied to railroad expansions in the 1890s. Now retired and nearly blind, Claiborne agrees to meet Renshaw in a Baltimore boarding house. He confirms it. The woman? Claiborne says, I met her once, Kansas City, after the train depot burned down. Said her name was Evelyn. Told me to follow the railroads if I wanted to understand the fires. He hands Renshaw a worn map. On it, train lines intersect with circled fire zones. Rail expansions, warehouses, timber routes, all the flashpoints of suspicious blazes. She called it the second TheAshLine, Claiborne whispers. This wasn't just about real estate. It was infrastructure, control of supply lines, storage and transport. Burn, erase, rebuild. The same method, a larger game. Renshaw follows the clues to a 1918 incident in Cincinnati. A train carrying timber and property deeds derails and burns. No known cause. One survivor. A woman registered under the initials EM. He digs deeper. And then his access is revoked. Renshaw receives no explanation. The files vanish from his department. His Ember notes disappear from his desk. His questions are met with polite threats. But he presses on. He writes to independent historians. One writes back. Dr. Susan Harker, University of Toronto. She's spent 2 decades mapping unexplained fires in colonial ports. She doesn't know Eleanor's name, but she knows the pattern. They agree to meet. Before she arrives, Renshaw receives a final envelope at his home. No return address. Inside. You've come too close. They still burn what they cannot bury. Stop digging, or you'll vanish like the rest. The column was hollow, but the tower still stands. EM. He knows it's not a threat. It's a warning. He sends the last Ember book to Dr. Harker with a note. Publish it in pieces. Keep it moving. 2 days later, a fire consumes the north wing of the archive building. Box 717F is lost. Toronto. Dr. Harker's book, Patterns of Ash, A Hidden Cartography, is published under academic protest. Half the reviewers call it speculative nonsense. The other half ignore it. But in underground circles, among archivists, data analysts, and city historians, it circulates like wildfire. Quietly, widely. In the final chapter, Harker includes a photo, the Lakeshore woman. EM. No identity. No location. Just a caption. She knew before we did. She watched the flames. She watched the towers. In a hidden appendix, she reprints Hale's original final note. She saw the fire coming. She stepped into it, not to burn, but to carry the truth through it. The TheAshLine never fully died. But in libraries, city halls, and history departments across the world, quiet readers trace lines in old maps, margins of deeds, and forgotten fires. Eleanor Middleton left no monument, no gravestone, only questions. And warnings. Still burning.